The smell was the first thing to betray the architecture. In the expansive, derelict silence of the Blackwood tenement, the air usually tasted of wet plaster, rat leavings, and the distinct, copper tang of old plumbing rusting in the dark. It was the scent of a building that had died 10 years ago, a concrete carcass left to rot in the city's industrial scar tissue. But on the fourth floor, standing at the top of a stairwell that groaned under the weight of his boots, Soren Kale smelled lavender and warm milk. It was an impossible scent, cloying, humid, and sickeningly domestic. It hung in the corridor like a physical curtain, separate from the surrounding decay. Soren adjusted the grip on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the suspension of dust motes dancing in the hallway. He was a man composed of sharp angles and exhaustion, his face hollowed by 3 months of searching. His brother Julian hadn't just disappeared, he had been erased. No digital footprint, no credit card usage, just a final cell tower ping that triangulated to this condemned block. Soren wiped sweat from his forehead. The climb had been grueling, but the sweat felt cold, clammy. He passed Unit 410, then 411. The doors were peeling laminate, scarred by graffiti and time, the wood swollen with dampness. Then he reached Unit 412. The door did not look like the others. It possessed a sheen that swallowed the light rather than reflecting it. It looked less like painted wood and more like a scab that had formed over a wound in the wall. The frame around it seemed slightly inflamed, the drywall pinkish and puffy where it met the jamb. Soren reached out. The knob was warm. Not the warmth of a sun-baked surface, but the low, feverish heat of a sleeping animal. A faint vibration traveled from the brass into his palm, a pulse. "Julian?" he whispered. The name died in the hallway, absorbed by the damp drywall. He turned the knob. It didn't click. It squelched, a wet, muscular rotation, and the door swung inward with a sound like a lung inflating. Soren stepped across the threshold, and the cold reality of the derelict building vanished. The transition was violent in its subtlety. One moment, he was in a drafty ruin, the next, he was submerged. The room was bathed in a low, amber light, though Soren couldn't immediately locate the source. The temperature spiked 20 degrees. It was humid, tropical, carrying that scent of lavender masked by something deeper, an underlying odor of iron and spoiled meat, like a butcher shop scrubbed too hastily with floral detergent. It was a living room. A perfectly mundane, horrifyingly typical living room. To his left, a coat rack stood tall and rigid. To his right, a bookshelf laden with thick, leather-bound volumes. In the center, a Persian-style rug spread across the floor, leading to a heavy armchair and a matching ottoman. Against the far wall, a heavy set of velvet curtains obscured a window. Soren lowered his flashlight. The amber glow of the room was sufficient, pulsing rhythmically, brightening and dimming in time with a slow, subaudible thrumming sound that he felt in his teeth rather than heard in his ears. "Julian?" he called again, louder. The acoustics were wrong. His voice didn't bounce. The walls drank the sound instantly, leaving his words feeling flat and dead as soon as they left his lips. Soren took a step forward, and his boots sank slightly. The floor wasn't wood. It gave way under his weight with a dense, rubbery resistance, rebounding slowly as he lifted his foot. He looked down. The floorboards were patterned with a grain that looked like wood, but the swirling knots were too organic, too chaotic. They looked less like oak and more like capillaries frozen in resin. He moved deeper into the room, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His mind, rational and desperate, tried to categorize what he was seeing. Squatters, he told himself. Someone fixed the place up. Someone eccentric. But the silence was heavy, pressing against his eardrums like deep water. And there was a feeling of being watched, not by eyes, but by the space itself. The air felt thick, rubbing against his skin like wet velvet. He saw a mirror hanging above a small console table near the entrance. He moved toward it, needing to see a familiar face, even if it was just his own haggard reflection. He stepped in front of the glass. The reflection showed Soren, pale and terrified. But the glass, it rippled. It wasn't solid. It moved like oil on water. And in the reflection, the room behind him looked different. The armchair in the mirror wasn't empty. There was a vague, shadowy impression of a person sitting there. Soren spun around. The chair was empty. "Who's there?" he demanded. Nothing but the wet, thrumming silence. He turned back to the mirror, but now his reflection was lagging. He blinked, and his reflection blinked a second later. He opened his mouth to speak, and the reflection smiled, a wide, unnatural stretch of lips that he hadn't made. Soren backed away, shivering. Okay, just find a clue. Just find him and get out." He approached the bookshelf. He needed something tangible. He reached for a book, a thick volume with a spine the color of dried terracotta. His fingers brushed the spine, and he recoiled. It wasn't leather. It was warm. It was slightly oily. Soren swallowed the bile rising in his throat and forced himself to look closer. The texture of the binding was fine, pebbled with microscopic pores. He pulled the book from the shelf. It slid out with a wet friction, trailing a thin strand of mucus. He opened it. There were no words. The pages were thin, translucent sheets of membrane, layered fiercely together. Within the creamy whiteness of the pages, fine red and blue lines webbed outward, veins. The text was merely the chaotic mapping of a circulatory system pressed flat. He dropped the book. It hit the floor with a wet thud, not a slap. "What is this?" he hissed, wiping his hand on his jeans. The residue burned slightly, tingling. He stumbled backward and bumped into the coat rack. He spun around, raising the flashlight as a weapon. The rack stood 6 feet tall. It was pale, polished to a high ivory shine. At the top, the hooks curved elegantly. Soren shined the light on the central pole. It wasn't wood. It was segmented. The ridges were fused, calcified vertebrae. The hooks weren't carved wood. They were finger bones, bent and fused at impossible angles, the knuckles polished down to smooth, white knobs. Soren's breath came in short, jagged gasps. The room was closing in. The walls seemed to be inhaling, the room shrinking by fractions of an inch with every breath he took. He saw the curtains on the far wall. A window. If there was a window, there was an escape. Or at least fresh air. He rushed to the heavy, maroon velvet drapes. They felt damp, like heavy tongues hanging vertically. He grabbed the fabric, it felt muscular, and ripped them open. There was no glass. There was no outside world. Where the window should have been, there was a membrane, taut and semi-transparent, pulsing with a backlight of raw red. Through the cloudy surface he saw shapes. Not the industrial park outside, but a distorted, hazy image of a backyard. His backyard from 20 years ago. He saw two blurry figures, small boys, running in circles. "Julian?" he breathed, his hand touching the membrane. The image shifted. The boys stopped running. They turned to look at him. They had no faces, just smooth, fleshy indentations. One of the faceless boys raised a hand and pointed at Soren. "Come in," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the boys. It came from the curtains wrapping around his wrists. Soren screamed and tore himself free, stumbling back into the center of the room. He needed to leave. Now. He turned back toward the door, but the door was gone. Where the heavy, scab-like entrance had been, the wall had sealed itself. A smooth, pinkish wallpaper, if it was wallpaper, now covered the exit. The pattern on the wall was faint, repeating, whorls and ridges. Fingerprints. The wallpaper pattern was thousands of magnified fingerprints. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his confusion. He ran to the wall and hammered his fists against it. It didn't bang. It bruised. The wall yielded like firm dough, absorbing the force of his blows. He clawed at it, his fingernails digging into the soft surface. It tore, but it didn't rip like paper. It split like skin. A thick, clear fluid wept from the scratches he made. "Help!" Soren screamed, the sound tearing from his throat. "Someone help me!" The room seemed to sigh. The amber light deepened to a bruised purple. The furniture seemed to shift, imperceptibly, leaning toward him. Soren backed away from the weeping wall, retreating to the center of the room. He was trapped in a stomach. He realized that now. A stomach that had learned to dream of being a house. He spun in a circle, looking for a weapon, a tool, anything. His eyes landed on the lamp sitting on the side table next to the armchair. The lampshade. It was a pale, beige color, stretched taut over a wire frame. But the light shining through it revealed imperfections. Small scars. Freckles. A distinct, jagged line that looked like a surgical scar. Soren froze. The world narrowed down to that lampshade. He knew that scar. It was a jagged hook shape, just below the rim of the shade. 10 years ago, Julian had fallen off his bike. He had needed 12 stitches on his forearm. Soren had held his hand while the doctor sewed him up. Soren walked toward the lamp. His legs felt heavy, as if the gravity in the room had doubled. The floor felt stickier now, grabbing at his soles. "Julian?" he whispered, his voice trembling. He reached out and touched the lampshade. It was soft. Pliable. It was skin. Stretched, cured, but undeniably human skin. He traced the scar with his thumb. A memory of his brother, reduced to home decor. Tears blurred his vision, hot and stinging. He looked at the base of the lamp. It wasn't ceramic. It was bone, fused and twisted, the pelvic girdle of a man reshaped into a vessel. Soren gagged, falling to his knees. He landed on the Persian rug. He looked down at the patterns woven into the fabric. They weren't dyed wool. They were hair. Thousands of strands of human hair, black, blonde, gray, red, woven into intricate, maddening geometric shapes. He was kneeling on a tapestry of the dead. "Why?" he sobbed, the fight draining out of him as the horror hollowed him out. Safety, a thought whispered. It wasn't a voice. It was a concept inserted directly into his frontal lobe. It felt invasive, like a worm burrowing into his gray matter. Unity. Purpose. You were looking for him. Now you are part of the same whole. The room was speaking to him. Not with words, but with a sudden, overwhelming wave of comfort. The temperature rose slightly, becoming womb-like. The smell of lavender intensified, masking the copper scent of the weeping wall. Soren tried to stand, but his knees wouldn't lift. He looked down. The rug, the hair was moving. Tiny, microscopic filaments of the woven hair had risen like sea anemones. They were wrapping around the denim of his jeans, threading through the eyelets of his boots. He thrashed, kicking out. "Get off! Get off!" He managed to rip one leg free with a sickening tearing sound, leaving the sole of his boot fused to the floor. But the room reacted instantly. The armchair, the massive, overstuffed chair upholstered in a dark, cracked leather that looked suspiciously like dried organ meat, shuddered. It didn't walk, it flowed. The material rippled, expanding outward. Soren scrambled backward, crawling on his hands and knees toward the corner. The chair blocked his path. It was larger now. The cushion split open, revealing a wet, red interior, pulsating like a heart. Rest, the room suggested. The feeling was narcotic. A heavy, drowsy numbness began to creep up Soren's fingertips where they touched the floor. You are tired. The search is over. He is here. You can be with him. I don't want to be a lamp, Soren whimpered, the absurdity of the sentence lost in the terror. He felt his mind fracturing, reality blurring at the edges. He backed into the corner. The walls were soft against his back. They felt warm, like leaning against another person. Not a lamp, the room whispered into his mind. We have a lamp. We need structure. The wall behind him moved. It didn't push him away, it embraced him. The soft, doughy surface enveloped his shoulders. He tried to pull forward, but his jacket had already begun to fuse with the wallpaper. The fibers of his clothes were dissolving, reknitting into the fleshy architecture. Soren watched in paralyzed horror as his left hand, pressed against the floor for leverage, began to change. It wasn't just visual. It was an agonizing, grinding sensation deep in his marrow. The fingers lengthened, cracking audibly as the joints rearranged themselves. The knuckles swelled and calcified. The skin hardened, turning pale and glossy, losing its poor texture and becoming smooth, polished enamel. His hand was becoming bone. It was becoming the leg of a table. No, no, no. He stared at the lamp, at Julian. The light flickered. Was it a greeting? Or a warning? It didn't matter now. The lethargy was overwhelming. The horror was still there, screaming in a distant corner of his mind, but his body was betraying him. It felt good to stop moving. It felt good to belong to the structure. The pain of the bone change faded into a dull, structural ache. The armchair slid closer. The red, wet maw in the cushion widened, glistening with digestive fluids. Soren felt his legs fusing together. The bones of his shins were knitting, thickening, turning into a solid pedestal. He felt his feet dissolving, reshaping into a sturdy, flat base. He was losing his height, his humanity, repurposed by an alien efficiency. He looked up at the ceiling. A chandelier hung there, made of teeth and cartilage. It tinkled softly, a sound like chattering. Be useful, the room purred. Be supported. Soren Kale opened his mouth to scream, but his jaw locked. The muscles in his face tightened, stretching, smoothing. His skin was turning into leather, thick and supple. His mouth was being sealed, pulled wide and taut, the lips fusing together to form a seamless seam. He wasn't becoming a table. He felt his torso hollow out. His ribs expanded, cracking and reshaping into a rigid frame. His internal organs dissolved, liquefying into a warm slurry that rapidly solidified into stuffing, soft, yielding foam. He was becoming the Ottoman. His vision began to fade as his eyes were absorbed into the pattern of the upholstery. The last thing he saw was the lamp, Julian, shining down on him. A family reunion in the quiet dark of the living room. The scream died in his throat, which was no longer a throat, but a wooden strut. The room settled. The amber light steadied. The floor ceased its pulsing. In the center of Unit 412, a new ottoman sat before the armchair. It was a handsome piece, upholstered in a strange, pale leather that seemed to sweat slightly in the heat. It matched the decor perfectly. The door to the hallway reappeared, the scab falling away to reveal the peeling laminate of the tenement. The lock clicked open. The room waited. It was hungry, and it needed a side table.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.